This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, welcome everyone. So in the 5 towns, today's vacation week, we have a lot of faces from around the tri-state area, and we have a very interesting topic this evening. And Parshas Va'era begins by speaking about the Makos, the 10 Makos. We have 7 in Va'era and 3 in Parshas Vay. And as the Chavos HaBabos tells us, as we get older and as we mature, we always have to rethink and develop our understanding of the episodes in Chumash. Because as a kid, you think about the Makos, and they sound like somewhat like sounds like a circus. You know, finally this year, the circus is ending after 150 years. So now finally the Ringling Brothers and Baron Bailey's circus is ending. As soon as the Yidden, they start making their own circus on Chol Hamoed, immediately after, now they're over batal. But what's the pshat in the Makos? How do we understand why the Rebbe Shalom specifically sent these 10 plagues? And there are many midrashim, most notably the Medrash Tanchuma and Parshas Va'era, the Tana Dveliyahu in Parak Zayin, and they both say that the basic principle with which Rebbe Shalom administered the Makos is the principle of mida keneged mida, measure for measure. In Latin, it's called quid pro quo, measure for measure, mida keneged mida. And the Medrash goes through. If you look in the Medrash Tanchuma, there's less explanation, but the Tana Dveliyahu says it more explicitly and fleshes it out a little bit more. The Tana Dveliyahu says, why did the Rebbe Shalom bring upon them makas dam, blood? Because the Mitzrayim would see the Jewish, the men and the women, they would go to the mikvah to purify themselves from their tumah. The Bnei Yisrael would purify themselves from their dam. And the Mitzrayim went ahead and they basically closed down the mikvahs, they closed down the ritual baths, and they didn't allow the Inoshim to be toivel. And therefore, because they stopped the purification of the blood of Klal Yisrael, therefore they were punished measure for measure, mida keneged mida, all their water turned into blood. By the way, the Tana Dveliyahu emphasizes the fact that the kavanah of the Mitzrayim was they wanted to stop the Klal Yisrael from proliferating, from having children. The lashon of Tana Dveliyahu on the 4th line is v'lo yavayu zal zev lo yifru v'yirbu. They didn't want Klal Yisrael to have children. And the Medrash says, why did Rebbe Shalom bring upon them tzifardea? Because they would order Klal Yisrael to bring for them, to sport with, to play with, shkotzim, ramasim, creepy crawling things, and therefore God punished them, mida keneged mida, measure for measure, that that they were attacked, they were bombarded, they were assaulted by frogs everywhere. And the Medrash says, why lice? Because they made the Jewish people sweep the streets, sweep the houses, sweep the highways, and they made men sweep a woman's house, a woman sweep a man's house. Therefore, the Rebbe Shalom decreed that all of their dirt, all their dust was transformed into lice. And what about wild animals? Well, they would send the Jewish people on these hunting tours to bring them bears and lions, and they would have to bring it back for the Egyptians to sport with. And therefore, and again, the Tana Dveliyahu says the kavanah of the Mitzrayim was that the Jews should go to really far out places and leave their homes. They wouldn't be able to engage with their wives, and it would stop them from having children. And why dever? Why did their animals suddenly die? So the Medrash says the Mitzrayim made the Jewish people shepherd all of their animals, their horses, their donkeys, their camels, and they made them go to, again, faraway places so that so that Klal Yisrael would not be able to have children. Therefore God said, you're going to cause the Jewish people to suffer by shepherding your animals. Okay, all your animals are going to drop dead. And why boils? They made us cool off their baths, warm up their baths, make them hot showers, cold showers. So now, Rebbe Shalom made it that the Egyptians developed these boils, and this way, the Egyptians could not bathe in any type of water, and we would not have to serve them. And then Barad, the Medrash says that we had to plant gardens and orchards and all kinds of trees, and this way we'd be outdoors all day. Again, the Medrash says so that we won't be able to have children, and therefore God struck down all of these orchards, all of these trees with hail. And the Arbe, they made us plant wheat, and they made us plant barley and all kinds of legumes so that we shouldn't spend any time at home. So therefore God cut it all down with the grasshoppers. And basically the Medrash goes on to say darkness was for a different reason, so that the Mitzrim should not see that most Jews did not really deserve to make it out of Mitzrayim. So Hashem didn't want the Mitzrim to see the Jewish people dying, so he turned off the lights. And because they killed our children, so their firstborn died in Makas B'charas. Basically, the principle that the Rebbe Shalom is using over here is called Mida Keneged Mida, Quid Pro Quo. By the way, I don't have it on the sheet here, but I once saw many years ago, the pasuk says B'zroya Netuya, with an outstretched arm. With an outstretched arm. What exactly does that mean with an outstretched arm? How did the Rebbe Shalom administer an outstretched arm? So the Netziv says that in between the Makos, if you're of Mitzri and you have half a brain, say, what's going on over here? Our country's falling apart. We're being devastated. Get these people out of here. So what the Rebbe Shalom wanted to do was constant bombarding them with Makos, so they shouldn't even have a moment to think and say, we got to stop this. We got to get these people out of here. So the Zroya Netuya, the Netziv writes, is in between the Makos. The Rebbe Shalom basically assassinated key Egyptian officials. They just dropped dead, so that even in between the Makkahs, they were just so preoccupied with dealing with their casualties, they didn't have a moment to think and say, hey, what are we doing? Why are we allowing them to stay in our country? And I once saw in a book written by a rabbi in Philadelphia. His name is Rabbi Avram Steinberg. The name of the book is The Year in Drashos, where he basically says this was a punishment, Mida Keneged Mida, because Paro's whole intention was that Tichbad Ho'avoda Anoshim, he made us so busy that we shouldn't ever have time and think for a moment, what are we doing in this country? Let's figure out how to get out of here, right? Like the Mesilas Yesharim writes, that if the Jewish people had had a moment to sit and think and contemplate about their misery, they would have planned an escape. But they were constantly bombarded with hard work. They didn't even have a moment to think. So God punishes them again, Mida Keneged Mida, measure for measure. Okay, so this is the concept of Mida Keneged Mida. What's very interesting is that aside from the fact that the concept of Mida Keneged Mida appears in hundreds and thousands of places in the Chumash, in the Mishnayos, in the Gemara, in the Medrash, there's literally, I have a sefer at home. It's published by Mossad Rav Kook, called Mida Keneged Mida. I didn't realize, it's a huge sefer, it's like 500 pages. I didn't realize it was volume 3. Okay, so there are 3 volumes of, so it's Mida Keneged Mida, literally thousands of examples. But there are 2 main Gemaras and Shas that discuss the rule of Mida Keneged Mida. And in the 2 places, the language that the Gemara uses is slightly different from each other. So for example, look at number 3. The Mishnah says in Saita, the Mida Sha'ada Moided Ba Moidedin Lai. With the measure that a person measures out, that's how they measure to him. And it's specifically talking about the Saita. We know the Saita, she was unfaithful to her husband, and she went in secret with another man, and she committed something improper. So the part of the process of debasing the Saita is we put her in the Beis HaMikdash in front of everybody's eye, and we humiliate her publicly. And basically the Mishnah says that every step that is trying to undermine and embarrass the Saita, is she's being punished Mida Keneged Mida for what she did. And the Mishnah says she adorned herself to do an Avera, so therefore we disgrace her. She uncovered herself to sin, so therefore we uncover her sin publicly. And the Mishnah says her sin began with her yarech, with her thigh, then went to her beten, to her stomach, and that is how the Saita waters punish her, first the yarech, and then the beten. And the Gemara says an amazing thing, a very frightening thing, that even though we no longer have the Daled Misos Bezdin, Skila, Sreifa, Hereg, and Chanek, nevertheless, the concept of the 4 types of death still exists. So, for example, the Gemara says that even though we don't have Sanhedrin anymore, the Daled Misos Bezdin are in effect to some extent. How is that? Someone who's Chayiv Skila Someone who's chayiv to be stoned could fall off of a building, chas v'shalom, or it could be eaten by a wild animal. Someone who is liable to be sreifa, for burning, could fall into a fire, could be bitten by a venomous snake. Someone who's chayiv hariga, which is to have with the sword, is either given over to the malchus or is attacked by robbers. Someone who's chayiv chanika, choking, could be drowned. In other words, even though the technical 4 misais are not administered by our courts anymore, the theme of them is very applicable. And then the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Omer, Minayin shebemida sha'adam moided, ba moided in life. How do I know that in the way that a person conducts himself, that is how they act with him from heaven? Shenemar, the pasuk says like this. It's a pasuk in Yeshaya. Bisasea, with a precise measure. Bishalcha, when you send her away to rivenha, you'll contend with her. In other words, when God throws the Jewish people out of Eretz Yisrael, He does so with an exact measure. It's not arbitrary. It's not random. It's laser sharp, it's precise, exactly what the Jewish people deserve. And the Gemara goes on to say, even though the language of the pasuk is bisas se'ah, a sa is a large measurement, it's not only for a very big sin God gives a big punishment. The Gemara goes on to say, even if we sin half that amount, then the punishment is exactly half that amount. And if it's a quarter, it's a quarter. And if it's an eighth, and a 16th, and a 32nd. In other words, the punishment that God gives to Averos is exactly b'midah she'adam moided ba moided in lai. And what's the source? Again, the pasuk b'sas se'ah b'shalcha terivena. What's interesting is there's another Gemara. There's a Gemara in Sanhedrin on Daf Tzadi, and the Gemara in Sanhedrin on Daf Tzadi is talking about those who don't have a share in the world to come. Right? The Mishnah says, Kol Yisrael, yesh lahem chelek l'olam haba, every Jew has a share in the world to come, except, and one of the exceptions is someone who says there's no tchias hamesim in HaTorah. Meaning, if somebody does not believe that there is a remez to tchias hamesim in the Chumash, they do not deserve olam haba. And the Gemara asks, v'kol kach lama, just because, again, the person doesn't deny tchias hamesim, he doesn't deny the resurrection of the dead, he just doesn't believe there's a remez to it in the Chumash. So the Gemara says, v'kol kach lama, why has this person forfeited his share in the world to come? And the Gemara says, you know why? Shekol midoisav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, midah keneged midah. All of God's attributes are measure for measure. Meaning, because he doesn't believe in Olam Haba, therefore measure for measure, he won't get Olam Haba. Now, interesting, the Gemara uses a different language. The Gemara in Saita uses a Lashon, B'midah sha'adam moided, ba moided in lai. The Gemara in Sanhedrin uses a language, Shekol midoisav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, midah keneged midah. How do we know this? So the Gemara says, you know how we know? Because one day, Elisha, there was a big famine, and food was very expensive. And Elisha makes an announcement, tomorrow in the gates of Shomron, food is going to be cheap like anything. You're going to get a pound of wheat for a shekel, 2 pounds of barley for a shekel. And there's an officer standing there and says, what? God's going to do that? What? He's going to open up windows in the heavens? And Elisha says, okay, you're going to see it, but you're not going to eat from it. And sure enough, the guy was trampled to death. Why? Because since he didn't believe in it, so midah keneged midah is punished that he didn't eat from it. He didn't experience it. He didn't enjoy it. So we know that Rabbi Akiva Eiger, on the side of the Gemara, wrote a very concise commentary. It's called Gilyon Hashas. And sometimes he doesn't say anything more than, look at this Gemara. So what's very interesting is, if you look at the Gilyon Hashas on Masechta Sanhedrin, where the Gemara is discussing midah keneged midah, Rabbi Akiva Eiger says, look at the Gemara in Saita on Daf Ches Amud Beis. And if you look at the Gemara in Saita Daf Ches Amud Beis, Rabbi Akiva Eiger says, look at the Gemara in Sanhedrin on Daf Tzadi. So like, what's he getting at? What does he want? You know, you learn the Gemara in Sanhedrin, what do you do? Says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, learn the Gemara in Saita. You learn the Gemara in Saita, what do you do? Learn the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Like, what does Rabbi Akiva Eiger want over here?
What's he learn?
So apparently, the Gemaras contradict each other. Why? Because the Gemara in Saita says, how do I know b'midah sha'adam moided ba moided in lai, in the measure in the way that a person measures out, that's how they measure out to him. And the Gemara brings a pasuk, B'sasa'ah b'shalcha terivena, that when God sends us out, He sends us out with an exact measurement. And when the Gemara in Sanhedrin asks, how do I know that the Rebbe Shem deals with the person Midah Keneged Midah? It quotes a different pasuk. It brings a raya from the shlish, the officer in the time of Elisha. What's wrong with what the Gemara in Saita said? Why would the Gemara in Sanhedrin have to look for a different source than what the Gemara in Saita said? Apparently that's what Rabbi Akiva Eiger is getting at. In other words, why is the source that the Gemara in Saita brings not sufficient for the Gemara in Sanhedrin? The Gemara in Sanhedrin asks, how do we know God deals with the person Midah Keneged Midah? So why didn't we just say He deals with the person Midah Keneged Midah from the pasuk B'sasa'ah b'shalcha terivena? That seems to be what Rabbi Akiva Eiger is bothered by. He doesn't answer it, but he sort of points out, you have these two Gemaras, they seem to be expressing the same principle, and they're learning it out from different sources. So maybe you say, well, maybe they're different principles. Maybe one principle is, B'midah she'adam moeded ba moeded in la, and the other principle is Midah Keneged Midah. Maybe they are two different rules. Maybe one rule you call, in the way that a person measures something out, they measure out to him. And one rule is called measure for measure. So it's very interesting. I found a Rashi in Masechta Nedarim. Rashi says, look at number 7, Midah Keneged Midah. What's the law of measure for measure? The rule is, B'midah she'adam moeded ba moeded in la. So Rashi, it's the same rule. Just different ways of saying it. So it's not that the Sugya and Saita is talking about the rule of B'midah she'adam moeded ba moeded in la, and the Sugya and Sanhedrin is Midah Keneged Midah, because Rashi is saying it's the exact same rule. So more Rabbi say the Marsha is bothered by this question. Marsha is bothered once the Gemara in Saita establishes that we have a makar, we have a source, that the way a person acts, that is how God deals with him. Why is that source not good enough for the Gemara in Sanhedrin?
Doesn't the Gemara say Kol Kach Lama?
Yeah, that's the first question. Good point.
Kol Kach Lama is saying that really the din is the derech she'adam moeded ba.
Right, but the question is, why so much?
Because of that, then the Gemara says, wait, Kol Kach Lama, that's not consistent with the midah. But
the Gemara answers, he denied Tchias HaMesim, therefore he doesn't have a share in Tchias HaMesim.
It's not moeded. It's a different din altogether.
Yeah.
It's a din in Hanhaga. We are being noig with you. That's why the Gemara starts off. Kol Kach
Here, so
denies that.
Okay, maybe you could have said that. Listen to how the Marsha says that. The Marsha says like this, that from the Gemara in Saita, it's not enough. Why? Because the Gemara in Saita is discussing the Saita. And that when the Saita acts unfaithfully, and she adorns herself, and she uncovers herself with action, with Maisa, so then we know we're going to punish her with an action that's commensurate, that's measure for measure, that's quid pro quo. But the Gemara in Sanhedrin, we're talking about a nice guy. And he comes to shul, and he's from the Asar Rishon, from the first 10 guys in the shul, and he learns Daf Yomi every day. The only thing is, he didn't do anything wrong. It's all in his head. He doesn't believe there's a source in the Chumash for Tchias HaMesim. Did he do an act? He did no act. He didn't do an Avera b'Maisa. All his whole infraction is, he had an improper thought. And that is, he doesn't believe that the Chumash alludes to Tchias HaMesim. So how do you know that God is so exacting with a person that He even knows your thoughts and He will reward or punish you in accordance with your thoughts? That's very far-reaching. That means the concept of Midah Keneged Midah is so minuscule and minute and nuanced that it even deals with a person's thoughts. That's the Gemara in Sanhedrin. That Midah Keneged Midah is not only your actions, it's even your thoughts, it's even your opinions, it's even your beliefs. If you believe a certain thing, which is improper, God will also deal with you measure for measure. Okay, so that's the topic that somehow I ended up with tonight. The concept of Midah Keneged Midah. And this is a very important concept, as we're about to see, that we know when Yisro came to his son-in-law Moshe Rabbeinu, he said, "Oh, Moshe, now I know that God is the greatest God in the world." How does Yisro know? He said like this, "Ki badavar asher zodu aleihem," because in that which they planned to do to us was done to them. They wanted to drown the Egyptians. The Egyptians wanted to drown us, and they were drowned in the Yam Suf. So think about it. Says Yisro to Moshe, you know how I know God is the greatest God? Because he deals with people measure for measure. This, in the mind of Yisro, was the greatest illustration of the greatness and power of Hashem. What's very interesting, Rabbi Isai, is that there's a phenomenal medrash. The medrash says like this. The way Rashi explains it, when God created the world with 49 ways. 49 pathways and byways and highways. And none of them are in operation anymore. They're all out of, they all ceased. All of the hanhagos, all of the modes, all of the modus operandi that God created the world with have all ended, have all ceased. They're not in operation anymore. There's only one midah with which God created the world that's still operable. And that's midah keneged midah. Amazing thing. The Medrash says in Bereishis Parsha Tes Oisir Aleph, listen to this, Amar Reb Simon b'shem Reb Shimon bar Abba, Kol hamidos batlu. All of the ways with which Hashem created the world. That's how Rashi explains in number 13. Every single method and tool and highway and by with which Hashem created the world, it all ceased, it all ended. There's only one midah which still works. Midah keneged midah loy batla. Wow. Why would that be? Why would that be? Why would every single way with which God created the world stop, and the only operation of God that still functions is the operation of midah keneged midah? It's like, you have a phone, and every single button doesn't work anymore. There's only one button that you say, why does that button still work? Why is that the only thing that still works? And this is a question that Rabbi Rucham Levavitz in the Sefer Das Torah in Parshas Devarim, this is something that he's bothered by. If you look at number 14, exactly why is it that this is the only continual operating mode of the Ribbon Shalom? It's interesting that he points out, there's a medrash. The medrash says, it's a Bereshis Rabbah and it's Yushalmi, that there's a big machlokes between Rabbi Kiva and Ben Azai. What's the most important pasuk in the Chumash? So Rabbi Kiva gets up, and he says, the most important pasuk in Chumash, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor like yourself. Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. That makes a lot of sense. If you actually treat people the way you would want to be treated, you'd be in pretty good shape. You'd be fulfilling a good part of the Torah. And Ben Azai gets up, and Ben Azai says, what are you talking about? Ben Azai says, I have a much more important pasuk. Ben Azai says, the most important pasuk in Chumash is Zeh Sefer Toldos Adam. This is the book of man. B'Tselem Elokim bara Oisai. God created man in His image. What's the big revelation over there? Why is that the most important pasuk in Chumash? So let me share with you a few examples in the Torah of how midah keneged midah works, just to get a little glimpse of the process that, according to Chazal, is the only process that's still operable. I found another sefer, besides the 3 volumes, Midah Keneged Midah, which was written by son of Aaron Yeshua Pasin, who apparently, he's a contemporary. I saw he has a haskama from Rabbi Parrot Steinberg back in Kew Garden Hills. So obviously, this is not from 500 years ago. This is a Heintige sefer. I found another sefer called Midah Keneged Midah, and he has some pretty interesting examples of midah keneged midah, and I say them with slight hesitation because it's somewhat conjecture. If Chazal don't identify something in the Chumash as midah keneged midah, are we really entitled to attribute it to that? But I'll share with you nevertheless. Who redeemed Bnei Yisrael from Mitzrayim? Moshe Rabbeinu. Think about it, Moshe Rabbeinu. Do you know how much hakaras hatov Moshe Rabbeinu should have had to Parai? First of all, if not for Parai, Moshe Rabbeinu wouldn't have had any baby food. He wouldn't have had any clothing when he was a kid. He wouldn't have had a bed to sleep on. Basically Paro raised him. Paro was his father. Moshe grew up in Paro's house. I mean, when Moshe Rabbeinu woke up during the night, and Basi said, "Daddy, I can't take it anymore. You want to wake up?" I mean, Paro woke up in the middle of the night. He was cradling Moshe Rabbeinu. He was playing with him. Paro got down on the floor. He played Lego with Moshe Rabbeinu. Paro was basically Moshe's father. By the way, the Ibn Ezra says, intentionally, God wanted Moshe Rabbeinu to grow up in a royal house. Because had he grown up among the Jews were a bunch of slaves. They had a slave mentality. They had no ambition in life. They had a very low morale. He wanted Moshe to be groomed in a royal setting so Moshe would grow up to be a king. So Moshe owed everything to Paro. He owed his life to Paro, his whole career. And here it is, Moshe Rabbeinu. Look, if had God not told him to take us out of Mitzrayim, if he had done it on his own, we would have said Moshe is the biggest ingrate in history. Here the guy raises you, he grooms you, and now you're destroying his whole land. Fine, but God told him, what do you want Moshe Rabbeinu to do? But why did Hashem have it that Yetzias Mitzrayim should take place in a way where somebody had to be such an ingrate to Paro? Yeah. Why? Because Paro is the biggest ingrate in history. The guy can't sleep at night. Every night he's dreaming about fat cows and skinny cows, and fat grain and skinny grain. And the guy says he's having a heart attack. He doesn't know what to do with himself. People tell him you have 7 fat daughters and 7 skinny daughters, and his daughters are going to die, his daughters are going to live. He couldn't understand what's going on. He couldn't sleep. If you don't sleep for 2 nights in a row, if I wouldn't sleep in 2 nights in a row, I couldn't function the next day. Probably 2 years in a row, the man's not sleeping. He's probably going out of his mind. And finally, this guy gets out of jail. He tells him, relax, you're not having fat daughters and skinny daughters. It's just, we're going to have years of sati. You're going to put away the grain. I'll take care of it. You sit back on your throne. You look good on your throne. You take some nice pictures. We'll put you on the front cover of the newspaper. And I'll take care of the finances, and everything will be wonderful. And Yosef saved Egypt. He saved the economy in Egypt. He saved Paro's life. And what happened? He forgot about Yosef. He was an ingrate. The guy who saved his skin, he was the biggest kafay tova in history. Someone punishes him. Mida keneged mida. Paro, you're going to rescue this kid. You're going to raise the kid. You're going to feed the kid. You're going to care for the kid. And then he's going to come back and hit you over the head and destroy your country. That's what happens when you don't have Hakara Satay.
That's a proof that Paro is the same Paro. No.
Yeah, that's going according to the opinion that it's the same Paro. Yeah. Yeah, good point. Yeah. If you say it was a different Paro, we'll have to come up with a different reason. Yeah. Another interesting thought that the Sefer had, which I liked, was, Amram. Amram had a good kid. Moshe Rabbeinu. Imagine if your kid, everyone's coming over to your kid. What's the halach about this? What's the halach about that? Imagine, you come to visit your kid and there's a line out his door, from here down to, down Rockaway Turnpike all the way back to Queens. And then people are just lining up asking him questions. And whatever he says, they just do. Even God listens to Moshe. God says to Moshe, Hanichali, leave me alone. In other words, I have to listen to you, God says. What did Amram do that he was zoiche to have a kid like a Moshe Rabbeinu? So the Sefer suggests, very interesting, that nobody likes to take advice. As soon as somebody comes, I want to tell you something, you should really do this and this and this. Just a suggestion. So most people, their defenses go up, and they're thinking in their mind, get lost, I don't need your suggestion. Nobody likes suggestions. Now imagine if the suggestion came from your own kid. Certainly don't like your suggestion. Now Amram was a Gadol Hadar, and he had halachic shayla. The Egyptians are killing all the children. Should we have more children? Or maybe it's not right to make our wives pregnant and go through the pain of labor and delivery, and then just see their kids killed in front of their eyes. Maybe we're not allowed to do that. And Amram Paskin, I guarantee he looked through all the tshuvas. He looked through Tshuvas Rabbi Kiva Eger, Tshuvas Chassam Sofer, Noid Behuda. He looked through all the Hasidic Sfarim, everything. And he came and he Paskin, the halacha is that we're not allowed to have children. And this little girl comes, Tati, you're worse than Parai. Right? Because Parai only wants to kill the boys, and you want to kill everybody. Get lost. Go back to your jump rope. I don't know what are you telling me what to do? But he didn't do that. He listened to her. He listened to his own kid. She was right. So mida keneged mida. You listen to your kid when he's right. You're going to have a kid that the whole world listens to. Interesting. By the way, so another interesting thing, and there's you ever see most people know the English, the one, Nachshoni, right? Nachshoni al Torah, the Art Scroll green books, they have it in Hebrew also, Hagois al Parshas Torah. He brings down from Rabbi Yosef Tzvi Dushinsky, one of the tzaddikim in Yerushalayim. All the Mefarshim ask, because Yosef asked the Sar HaMashkim, remember me. So Yosef was punished, he had to spend another 2 years in jail. So everybody in their first cousin asks, well, what did Yosef do wrong? He asked the Sar HaMashkim, do me a favor, when you get out of jail, put in a good word. That's called hishtadlus. Aren't you supposed to do hishtadlus? Like, what did Yosef do wrong? So Rabbi Yosef Tzvi Dushinsky says, he did nothing wrong. It's not an avera, and it's not a punishment. The only thing is that Hashem deals with a person, midah keneged midah. So Yosef, you want to get out of jail through the Sar HaMashkim? No problem. You're just going to have to wait until the Sar HaMashkim has an opportunity to tell Pari about a dream. Pari didn't have a dream for 2 years. It's not a punishment. It's just midah keneged midah. If this is how you would like to be saved, you're going to have to wait until this way plays itself out. It's not a punishment. It's the reality of the way the world works. That if you put your faith in a certain thing, then you're going to have to wait until that thing has an opportunity to come through for you. It's not an oynesh, it's just it's a reality. The following, what I'm about to tell you, is to me the most beautiful illustration of this concept. It's mind-boggling, really a gorgeous explanation. There's a Gemara Masechta Tainus on Daf Chaf Hey Amud Beis. Number 19 on your sheets. The Gemara says there's a man by the name of Rebbe Lezer, and there was no rain, and he gets up, he goes to be the chazan, and he starts crying, bracha, 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 aninu, 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 24 bracha. Garnish telfin, nothing helps. The world is as dry as ever. So what happened? Rabbi Akiva says, step aside, let me try. And Rabbi Akiva says like 3 words, Avinu Malkeinu, Ein Lanu Mechalata, Avinu Malkeinu, Rachim Aleinu. Bam! The cloud, the sky becomes dark, and it's raining here like the last 2 days. Right? And everybody starts making fun of Rebbe Lezer. Oh, Rebbe Lezer, what kind of rabbi are you? Here you down 24 brachas, nothing happens. Rabbi Akiva just says, Avinu Malkeinu, and it's pouring. Whereupon, the Gemara says, the heavens open up, and a Baskol calls out, no. Not because Rabbi Eliezer is less than Rabbi Akiva. Not because Rabbi Akiva is greater than Rabbi Eliezer. It's because Rabbi Akiva is maver on his midos, and Rabbi Eliezer is not maver on his midos. It's not because Rabbi Akiva is greater than Rabbi Eliezer, it's because Rabbi Eliezer is always a stickler for what he deserves, and Rabbi Akiva is always maver on his midas, is always mavater. So I asked Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, wait a second. Not because Rabbi Akiva is greater. If Rabbi Akiva is always mavater, and Rabbi Akiva is maver on his midas, Rabbi Akiva always overlooks injustice and is meichel everybody, then he's greater. Aren't you supposed to be maver on your midas? Isn't someone who's maver on their midas greater than someone who's not maver on their midas? What does the bas kol mean? Not because Rabbi Akiva is greater, but because Rabbi Akiva is maver on his midas and Rabbi Eliezer is not. Then Rabbi Akiva is greater. So in the Sefer Or Yisrael of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, which are the letters of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, which were written and published by Rav Litzl Petterberg, he says a wondrous thing that he heard from Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. Everybody knows there were 2 great tzaddikim, Shammai and Hillel. And the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos and Daf Lamed tells us all these stories about these crazy people who came to Shammai and they said, convert me while I'm standing on 1 foot. Convert me, I should be the Kohen Gadol. Convert me that I should be the new Secretary of State for Donald Trump. And Shammai every time, he said, get lost. Get out. You lost your mind? Get out, get lost. Don't waste my time. And Hillel dealt with him. Hillel, tolerated. And Hillel learned with them slowly and until they turned around. And the Gemara concludes, Tana Rabbanan, La'olam yehei adam an v'san ki Hillel. Person should always be humble like Hillel, v'lai kaptan kashamai. And not strict like Shammai. So if you ask most people, who is greater, Hillel or Shammai? Avada, Hillel was greater. Hillel was such a nice guy. Hillel was a sweetheart. Hillel was a softie. Hillel was he was makar of everyone. And Shammai was a tough guy. Shammai was mean. That couldn't be further from the truth. We're talking about Tanoim. We're talking about people that could bring you back, could bring someone back from the dead. We're talking about people who are like heavenly angels. It's not that Hillel was a nice guy and Shammai was a mean guy. The meaning here is they had a machlokes the same way they argued about so many halachos. Their machlokes was when you have somebody who comes with an unreasonable request to learn Torah in a disrespectful, demeaning way, what's the proper approach? Shammai says, you gotta stand up for the honor of the Torah. Imagine someone come in, Rabbi, teach me Torah on condition that I could eat a pig, or teach me Torah that I could marry my horse. So get out of here. You're Russia. Shammai said, if somebody comes with an improper request, you can't tolerate that. You have to stand up and show respect and honor to the Torah. There have to be standards. Shammai paskined, the correct course of action was, be a kapdan. And Hillel paskined, no, always be humble, always be tolerant, always be accepting. Was Shammai worse than Hillel? Was Hillel greater than Shammai? No, they were exactly equal. Shammai got reward in Olam Haba for following his shita, and Hillel got reward for following his approach. Because they both paskin that way, l'shem Shammai. Now what's very interesting is Rabbi Eliezer was a student of Shammai. Rabbi Eliezer Shamutihi. Rabbi Eliezer was a student of Shammai. Rabbi Akiva was a student of Hillel. Was Rabbi Akiva greater than Rabbi Eliezer? Of course not. Rabbi Eliezer followed the sheet of his Rabbi to be strong, not to tolerate deviance, not to tolerate people who challenge the Torah, not to be accepting. That was his approach, and he was rewarded for that approach. And Rabbi Akiva followed his Rabbi Hillel, who was more tolerant and more accepting. They were both equal in Shamayim. But, listen carefully, there was a famine, and there was no rain, and the Jewish people did not deserve the rain. And for God to make it rain, God is going to have to say that even though you don't deserve it, I'm a vatir and I'm going to overlook it. So when Rebbe Lezer davens, God says, I love you, Rebbe Lezer, you're a great guy. I can't bring rain for you because the Jewish people don't deserve it. But when Rebbe Kiva davens, God says, I can listen to your tefillah. Not because you're greater than Rebbe Lezer, because I deal with people the way they deal with others. And your approach is that even when people don't deserve tolerance, you tolerate them and you give in. So when you daven for rain, even though the Jewish people don't deserve rain, I'll give it to you. You're not any greater. In Shamayim, you're both going to be sitting there side by side on the exact same level. You, Rabbi Akiva, who follow the approach of Mavra al-Midas, and you, Rabbi Lezer, who follow the approach of being a kaptan. It's just in this particular instance, since the way God deals with people is midah keneged midah, he is only able to give in to a Rabbi Akiva whose approach in general was to be Mavra on his midas, as opposed to giving in to a Rabbi Lezer who in general was a kapdan. So this is a very clear demonstration of the concept of midah keneged midah. It's not a reward, it's not a punishment, it's a reality that God deals with a person the way they conduct themselves. Let's just digress momentarily. I found something very interesting in the Sefer Nefesh HaChaim of Rav Chaim Falaji, one of the great Sephardic giants, who says that the concept of midah keneged midah only applies to an individual, does not apply to a tzibur. And the source of that is, and the reason for that is, the language of the Gemara in Sotah is b'midah she'adam moeded ba moededin loy. That's how they deal to him, but not to a community at large. So the Reb Chaim Falaji asks, wait a second, there's so many examples. For example, the Gemara in Masechta Rosh Hashanah says that the Dar HaMabel was punished in boiling hot water because they sinned with their zera in roischen, and with boiling heat. Or Like we pointed out from Yisro. Yisro said the Mitzrayim were drowned because they drowned our babies. So we see that even to a tzibur there's a concept of midah keneged midah. So he says an interesting idea. What do you mean a tzibur? Goyim can never be a tzibur. You can't have, right, there's no such thing as a minion of Goyim. They're not mitzdaref. The expression is kesher rishaim ina min minyan. You could have 3 Goyim, 10 Goyim, 100 Goyim, they're just 100 individuals. So in Goyim, there's no concept of a tzibur of Goyim. But by Klal Yisrael, there is a concept of tzibur, and the concept of midah keneged midah does not apply to a tzibur. So he continues to ask, there are many examples where midah keneged midah applies even to Klal Yisrael. Again, by the way, we know off the bat, that's how we started off this year, the Makos, the 10 plagues, were midah keneged midah. But again, that's to Goyim, that's to the Gentiles. But he says an interesting idea that whenever you find in the Medrash or Chazal that God punishes Klal Yisrael as a whole, midah keneged midah, it's when they serve Avodah Zarah. Once they serve Avodah Zarah, they, so to speak, they're not B'chlal Yisrael anymore. You know, an example would be the Gemara Megillah says that in the times of Achashverosh, the Jews would bow down to the Tselem. So the Gemara asks, so they should have been destroyed. So the Gemara says they only did it outwardly, so Hashem dealt with them with the Gezerah outwardly, but he never really meant it. So that would be an example of midah keneged midah to the tzibur. But again, it sounds like when Klal Yisrael does an Aveira, they, so to speak, lose that status of being Yisrael and lose the status of Tzibur. Okay, that's just an interesting idea. But let's get back to the principle. And again, the principle is midah keneged midah. Why does God deal with a person midah keneged midah? Why does he operate that way? So the Sefer HaIkrim, Rabbi Yosef Albo, Sefer HaIkrim writes, the reason why God deals quid pro quo, midah keneged midah, is since we don't see Hashem and we don't see hashgacha pratis in the world, this is his way of, as clearly as possible, manifesting divine providence. In other words, this is the clearest way to see Hashem in the world, is when things occur to a person, whether reward or punishment, measure for measure. The lashon of the Sefer Ikram is V'zoi, the last words of number 23. V'zoi raya gedoyla al hahashgacha. This is an open proof to divine providence. Koiras leiv ketane amona. It rips up, it tears up the heart of people who lack faith. By the way, interesting, the Rabbeinu Bechaye brings down at the end of Bahaloischa, who buried Yosef? Who buried Yaakov Avinu? The Shvatim. But the most important person involved in the burial of Yaakov was Yosef. So because Yosef went ahead and added his prestige to the burial, he was the most important person there. Hashem said, I'm going to reward you measure for measure. There's only the greatest Jew could bury you. So who buried Yosef? Moshe. So now what's God going to do with Moshe? Because Moshe was the greatest person who ever lived. So who's going to bury Moshe? That's why only God was able to bury Moshe Rabbeinu. That's what the Torah says Hashem had it, because Moshe was the greatest person so only the Rebbe could bury Moshe. And Rabbeinu Bechai writes, the second line from the bottom of 24, V'hu moifes al hashgacha hapratis. This is clear proof to God's divine providence of reward and punishment. The Marsha adds, Marsha Masechet Megillah Daf Lamed Aleph adds, that the reason why God operates midah keneged midah is so that when a person hurts themselves, Chas v'shalom, or is rewarded, a person doesn't attribute it to coincidence. So that when a person suffers some type of loss, Chas v'shalom, instead of a person saying, well, who knows why that happened? You know, dems are the breaks. That's the way the cookie crumbles. No. Since a person understands that God operates measure for measure, he's able to say, no, this is not a coincidence. Either God must be punishing me for X, Y, and Z. If I hurt my hand, chas v'shalom, maybe my hand's not doing what it should be doing. If my mouth hurts, then maybe I'm not using my mouth for the right thing. Or vice versa. If a person experiences a success in a certain area, instead of saying, well, that's some people do well, some people don't, a person has a certain insight in, what does God want from me? What's He telling me? So one very acute thing, anybody know, if you have 2 mitzvahs, 2 esrogim, or 2 pairs of tefillin, how much more should you spend to get a nicer article of a mitzvah?
50.
So yeah, right. So you're supposed to spend a fifth of your money on a mitzvah. But let's say you have 2 items, and one's a little bit more expensive. Like, up to how much more should you spend on a nicer one? The Gemara says, hider mitzvah ad shlish. You should spend a third more to beautify a mitzvah. If one item is more, if the second item is nicer, but more than a third of the value of the other one, you don't have to buy it. Up to a third. Why? The beautiful thought in the Sefer Torah's Chaim, halachically, there are 2 types of measurements. There's something called midah mechuka. Midah mechuka is when you fill up a cup, and it's up to the top, it's exactly up to the top, leveled. And then there's midah gedusha, it's heaped over. It's heaped over, people, they say, all you could eat. So, there are 2 ways of doing it. You could fill up the plate, exactly up to the top. But if you know what you're doing, you could really get into that bowl higher than, some people better than others. Some people have this down, right? So, how much more is a heaped over plate than an exactly flat-lined? The Gemara says it's a third more. God could deal with us in 2 ways. When we daven, God, give me parnasa, God's going to say, well, you need $100,000 a year, so I'm going to give you exactly 100,000. God could fill up the plate exactly. But, we would like Him to fill up the plate. It's like, the kids. Can I have soda? You fill it up. That's it? Like, they feel you could pour another half the bottle into their cup. That's when we come to Hashem. Hashem, no, we don't just mean exactly what we need. We want you to heap it over. So God said, no problem, but I deal with you measure for measure. Now, the max that God is going to heap is midah gedusha, is heaped over, is up to a third. So therefore, it's recommended to spend up to a third more on the mitzvah. This way, when God gives you, He could give you up to a third more. He'll give you up to a third more, midah keneged midah, for the amount that we spend on a mitzvah. Okay, so this is really what I was very curious about, and that is, what about today, 2017? We definitely live in a time of hester panim, where God is not obvious and apparent in the world. You have to be looking for Him. If you're looking for Him, you'll see Him. But it's not like we live in the times of the temple where we see open miracles. So does Hashem still today operate midah keneged midah? Like, does every single thing that happened to me, am I supposed to say, oh, well, if I bump my nose a little bit, I must have done an aver with my nose, for sure, and I'm going to sit there and think for 3 days until I find an aver that I did with my nose. I must have been a Baal Gaiva with my nose up in the air. Or if I heard... Does that still apply today? Or is this like only in the olden days when, God was more apparent in the world? So I read a story about Rav Pam Zechron L'Bracha, that he writes in 1976, he was in New Hampshire, in Bethlehem, and he had fever, and he was ill, and he was sick, and his fever was raging, and he felt like he was going to faint. He calls his wife, I don't know what to do, I'm going to faint! And she runs out of the room, and she comes back with a lemon, and she says, bite into it! And Rav Pam bites into the lemon, and he sucks out every ounce of juice, and it revived him. And later he tells his son about it, and he says, I surprised myself how I ate that lemon so ravenously. I can't even imagine anybody ever eating anything with such gusto like I ate that lemon. And he was surprised at himself. And he said, wait a second, I did see somebody once eat a fruit like that. Many years ago, he said, I remember I went to a nursing home, I visited somebody who, lo yaleinu, was deathly ill, and I brought him some oranges.
Nursing home in Brooklyn.
And in Brooklyn, nursing home in Brooklyn. And I offered the patient some oranges. He said, no thanks. So there was a Rebbe there in the next bed. Later he found that it was the Rebbe from the Bronx. And apparently he was paralyzed. And Rav Pam said he offered him the orange. And this Admar bit into the orange with such gusto and such enthusiasm. He sucked out every ounce of that acidic orange, and he couldn't even talk. He was so sick. But his eyes were like popping out of his head in gratitude to Rav Pam. And then Rav Pam said, I realized that God was paying me back measure for measure. I gave this Yid an orange. I revived him. I gave him some life. I elevated his spirits, and with an orange. And God wanted to pay me back measure for measure. But Hashem waited. He didn't just, say the next day an orange didn't come down through my chimney. Hashem waited for that moment when my life was wavering and I was on the brink. And at that moment, that's when Hashem rewarded me, Midah K'neged Midah. And this is a story in the Torah Lamelech, and Rav Pam is advertising it. Presumably, Midah K'neged Midah is something that's still operable. I mean, in a way, we don't need a story for Rav Pam. That's what the Medrash says. Of all the Midas of Hashem, they all ceased, they all ended, except for Midah K'neged Midah. And on the other hand, I remember many, many years ago, I saw a sefer, and I was able to find it this week. The name of the sefer is Bitachon Chai, from Reb Shaul Wagshal. And he writes that even though Chazal tell us that Hashem punishes and rewards measure for measure, that's only in the olden days. Why only in the olden days? In the olden days, how many Averos do you do already? So you do your whole life 3 Averos. So, if a person gets hurt, they have a very narrow selection to be making from. So, it's easier to narrow it down. How many Averos did a person do in the first place? But nowadays, that we're full of sin, how in the world could a person possibly know why God is doing something? So he says that he heard B'derech Klal, that's only by Midah K'neged Midah is only by very big tzaddikim, but regular people, it would be very difficult for them to figure out, what's God telling them. What's very interesting is that in the introduction to the Sefer Midah K'neged Midah, he asks for haskama from Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Chaim Kanievsky was one of Gedolei Yisrael today. And you imagine, he presents Reb Chaim Kanievsky with a book with like 10,000 examples of Midah K'neged Midah. And Reb Chaim writes him the following letter. You have it on the last page. Reb Chaim writes to him, Loi hakol anachnu mavinu. We don't understand everything. There are things in this world that are secrets, and you're not going to know the reason for it. Why do you think Reb Chaim Kanievsky wrote this? Because if you just open up a sefer Midah K'neged Midah, you think that's it. I'm the next prophet of the world. Every single world event, I'm now going to interpret. Why Trump's the president? Because his father, one time, he gave money to a shul in the Bronx, and right, like all the newspapers say. I know exactly. All of a sudden, everybody's a Navi. So you open up a book, Midah K'neged Midah, you think now you could interpret every single event in history. So Chaim says, relax, pal. There's still a lot of things in this world we have no idea. So that's very confusing then. When things happen, could we say, I know why they happen? The answer is no. We can never know definitively why something happens. But it's probably a very healthy thing if somebody experiences something to ask themselves, what does Rebbe Shem want from me? And to say, look, I'm not a Navi, I don't know. We know for sure that everything Hashem does is Midah K'neged Midah. We may not know what his calculation is, and what his process is, and what Hashem has in mind, but we're allowed to take a guess. And you know what? If you have a toothache, it's probably a good idea to say, you know what? I have to be more careful with what I say. Knowing that it might not be that, maybe it's I'm not learning enough, or maybe it's something else. But at the very least, be aware that there is a definite process, that whatever happens in this world is measure for measure. We cannot be certain why something happens, but it's a good idea to try to think about maybe what in fact Hashem wants without really being able to come to an absolute answer. Just want to share with you 2 more things. And that is, as the introduction to Kabbalas HaTorah, Moshe, to leaving Mitzrayim, Hashem says, Moshe, you're the man to take them out. So Moshe says, I'm going to take them out. They're going to ask me, what's your name? What should I tell them? So Hashem says, what should you tell them? Tell them, my name is Ekya Asher Ekya. Aleph, Hey, and then a Yud and a Hey. My name is Ekya Asher Ekya. I don't pronounce it because that's the name of Hashem. So God is saying, my name is, I will be that I will be. What in the world does that mean? That's God's name. His name is, I will be that I will be. How is that God's name? And the Ramban says, what God meant to say is, the Jewish people are going to know, what is my identity? Who am I? How do I operate? You know what you tell them? I will be with you the way you are with me. That's the meaning of Ekya Asher Ekya. I act with you, and I operate in this world, and I am noeg, and I accustom myself to act in a way commensurate with the way you act in this world. That's who I am, and I believe that this was the introduction to the Makos, because probably Klal Yisrael is wondering, they're going to come, Moshe is going to say, we're going to take you out, and the Rosh Hashanah is going to smack and whack and punish the Egyptians in the most marvelous, spectacular way. And the Jews said, yeah, right, God's going to do that? How would he do that? So Moshe had explained to the Jews, you have to know who God is. God deals with people, midah keneged midah. What are you talking about? Yeah, that's his name. His name is, I will be that I will be. So, just to conclude, and this is a concept that Rabbi Yerucham in Parshas Devarim elaborates, and I must admit, what he says in a way is somewhat beyond me, and I hope I could explain it at least on some level. And that is, all of the attributes of God we no longer see in this world, but there is one attribute that the Medrash says is not batal, and that is the midah of midah keneged midah. Why does that attribute continue for all time? Why is that the one mode with which God always eternally operates? And Rabbi Yerucham explains, because that is the definition of Hashem. God is Ekya Asher Ekya, meaning the most important concept in the Torah is that a man was created in the image of Hashem. More than that, the Medrash says that God is our shadow. Now, what is a shadow? A shadow is not something that happens to be. A shadow is the reality of existence. When you move your hand like that, your shadow moves this way. And when you move your hand like that, shadow moves that way. And when you laugh, your shadow laughs. When you cry, your shadow cries. The way God created man is he made it that man is the image of Hashem and God is our shadow. The concept of midah keneged midah is not a way with which God operates. It's the very fabric of a human being. The very essence of a human being is, he is the image of God and God is the shadow of man. It's different than anything else God does. Everything else God merely does. He acts. What?
That statement.
Ekya Asher Ekya. Yeah. So Ekya Asher Ekya is saying that the concept of the midah keneged midah is not just God's way that he acts, but is actually his definition and the very fabric in which he created man. And man is the semblance of Hashem. So Hashem, when Hashem acts with us measure for measure, he's not acting with us measure for measure. He's not being noheg measure for measure. That's part and parcel in the way with which he created the human being, where Hashem says, I created you, that you are my semblance. And wherever you take me, that's where I'll go. And that is why this is the one mode which continues forever and ever. And in a way, this was Yisro's clearest understanding of Hashem. This is how I see God as the greatest of all gods. He was able to confine himself and limit himself to be able to be connected to man in such an intimate way that we literally control how God operates. That is the greatest sign of Hashem. But as the Rishonim write, as the Sefer HaIkrim writes, the concept of midah keneged midah, which one thing is for sure, we will see at times in this world. We will definitely be privy sometimes to midah keneged midah, and that, says the Sefer Ikrim, tears up any doubts and any room to question Hashem's hashgacha, and is the most open demonstration of the Yad Hashem in this world. Thank you everyone for coming. I wish you all a wonderful evening.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.